Welcome back to Khel Kamera Kanoon. We hope you liked the first episode. We are back with a second episode where we will deal with sports law in India, the implementation of sports law in India, and how the different stakeholders involved actually work around the legal system and how do they actually implement sports law. Joining us for this session is Shivam Singh, a Delhi-based lawyer who has been practicing since 2010. He read law at NLU Bangalore as well as the Columbia Law School and was a visiting researcher at Harvard Law School. His articles have been published by several national and international law journals. He has served as guest faculty for sports law at reputed law schools in India, such as the National Law School of India, University Bangalore, Nalsa University of Law, Hyderabad, and NLU Delhi. He has represented several sports clubs from India in disputes before regulatory bodies, High Court, Supreme Court, as well as the Court of Arbitration for sports. His list of clients also include sports administrators, athletes in regulatory disputes against several national sports federations. Given his expertise in sports law, the Supreme Court recently appointed him as an Amicus Curiae in a case dealing with criminalization of match fixing in India. Welcome, Shivam sir. Thank you for joining Khel Kamera Kanoon as a guest. It is great to have you here, and thank you for accepting our invitation. It is great to have a person like you who has seen different aspects of the law career, one of which is sports law. And we are really happy to host you here today on our episode.
Thank you, Ishaan. I'm really glad to get this conversation going. Thank you for having me here.
So starting, could you briefly tell us about your journey, how you entered into sports law, and what excites you about sports law as a career and as a practice area?
Well, I entered into law pretty much by a process of elimination and with a little bit of an element of luck. I wanted to pursue international relations, and amongst the people I knew who were in this sphere, rather my parents knew who were in this sphere, they suggested that either I can try it out as an undergrad option outside of India or prepare myself within it in India by doing a integrated course, because law is a large part of international relations. Diplomacy happens to be a fair part of international relations. And some of these subjects which we do in the integrated law course, such as economics, political science, history, they all are contributing factors to it. So that is what prompted me to get into law. And of course, my parents were most comfortable with this idea, with this choice, because by that time, my sister had already qualified for law, and my father himself happens to be a lawyer. So it seemed like a great idea with a margin of safety. So they encouraged me to do it. And with a little bit of luck, I managed to get into the law school of my choice. And from there, my journey started.
That's really nice. Has there been any specific sports law judgment or maybe a sports match itself where you understood the power of sports law or how it can affect one form of entertainment such as sports that we really enjoy?
Look, I think the most exciting sort of moment of realization while handling a sports law dispute came probably last year. And this was a dispute between East Bengal, Mohan Bagan, relating to
Right.
Anwar Ali. I was representing East Bengal in that dispute. And we had a tough hearing before the AIFF Player Status Committee. That decision went against us, but only the operative decision came out. And we had to challenge that decision with a very quick turnaround time before the Delhi High Court, because the appellate process within the AIFF was not working in the manner that it should. So we moved the Delhi High Court, and credit to the Delhi High Court, which listed the petition at record speed. And then we got a hearing, and it entirely turned on administrative law principles and constitutional law principles, wherein the court said that if you're making a decision applicable immediately, then you cannot simply release operative parts of the decision. You have to give out the whole decision, because you can't expect people who are suffering adverse orders or adverse decisions to not know the basis on which they're suffering. So that resulted in a practice getting set down in Indian sports law administration and Indian sports law circles, that you cannot rely on this practice of just releasing operative awards, especially if they're adversely affecting a party. You have to give some reasons and you have to back it up with logic. So I think that case before the Delhi High Court was a personally extremely satisfying case and helped me correlate a lot of principles of administrative law, which while studying in law school, I never thought would be spheres of areas that I would be using in sports law going forward. But yes, it was an extremely satisfying moment for sure.
Correct. So you said that, and I would like to add that sports law as a specific subject is either not taught in many of the law schools, and there's not much literature specific to India available. When I say literature, I refer to reference books, articles, or something that a student can read or even a lawyer can read to get a better understanding of this practice area. And basing on that, I saw that you recently authored a book on sports law. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I'll answer it in two parts, Ishaan. First of all, that within law schools, you're right, this is not taught as a standalone subject. And I don't think at the moment, although there is a lot of interest in the area, there is enough amount of people who are trained in sports law, which are available at the college level exercise. So that is perhaps one of the reasons why this is not being taught so often in law schools. That is not to say that students in law schools are not interested in this area. To the contrary, sports is always an area which interests the younger population far more than probably the slightly more mature one. So there are definitely a lot of takers for the course as and when it gets offered. But at this moment, there are not so many people who are professionally trained or who have contributed a lot in this academic space to be teaching it. So that, I think, is one of the reasons why you've not seen a lot of law schools offer it as a standalone subject. That's number one. Number two is that, coming to your question about a lack of literature in this subject area, that was one of the motivations for me to write in it. Because although there are a few commentaries which have come out on the subject, but those commentaries were not very recent. And by the time that I started and ultimately published it, along with my publishers, Thomson Reuters, there had been a slight bit of a gap anyway in that regard. So I hope that my book, which has come out, tries to cover that gap to a certain extent. And now with these two new game-changing legislations, you'll see that there's even more interest and even more contributions in this area.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That's great insight. Uh, I agree with what you say. What you said, that even if the subject is taught in a law school, it's either on a very superficial level or it's either outdated. Do you think that your book or anybody who reads your book will get a more practical understanding of how this subject area works?
Well, that's the hope. I can't say for sure that that will happen, but that's the hope, because I have written it while practicing in the courts and handling sports cases. So in the book, I have tried to utilize my experiences as a litigator and as a working professional in this area to offer a touch of practicalities. And I hope that that is something which appeals to the reader and they find it useful.
Absolutely, sir. Coming to your career, you have had a very interesting trajectory, like from law school in Bangalore to Columbia Law and then to Harvard. So, what were the key decisions or moments in your life which like designed this trajectory or which led you to take certain steps in your career?
Look, I think that just speaking about it brings a lot of memories back because it's a while ago. But I think an element which is involved in it that I will not rule out in any case is being at the right place at the right time with a element of luck. So while I say that, the examples which come to mind is that I wanted to do international relations, but somehow by a process of elimination and through a margin of safety, I ended up applying to law school. I ended up getting into law school. After that, I worked for a couple of years and then I decided to go for my LLM. And
Right.
then again, I put in my best foot forward and managed to secure admission. At Columbia Law, I was studying sports law as an elective for the first time.
Okay.
And that really offered a great insight into it because the way it was taught, and especially in US, which is a multi-sports country, it's
Correct. Yeah.
not that it's only basketball or it's
Mm-hmm.
only American football. There are multiple sports which are governing it. There's basketball, there's American football, there's ice hockey, there's baseball, which are all absolutely massive leagues. And in addition, America is good at a lot of other sports as well. So seeing it and studying it rather in a multi-sports country was a huge eye-opener at that point in
Absolutely.
time. And after that, I decided to apply for the visiting researcher position in sports law at Harvard because of the encouragement that I received from a classmate at Columbia Law. His name is Mario Ancic. He's a
Okay.
former tennis player,
Mm-hmm.
and he was my classmate. And he was extremely kind, supportive, and encouraging, wherein he told me that apply for it. This is something which will help you going forward. And it was only due to his words of encouragement and his support that I managed to secure admission into the Harvard Law School visiting researcher program for sports law.
And
So that again, if I was not there in my LLM and if I did not have a classmate as kind and encouraging as that, maybe I would not have taken the next step and I would have come back to India immediately after that without having this dedicated specialization. So I think I won't rule out luck in this regard at all.
absolutely. Uh, I agree with you that to some extent, sports law, especially in India, it's a very less venture into practice area, and people do not easily get into the sports industry or even the work for external law firms in the sports industry is quite limited. Do you think the absence of focus on non-cricketing sports in India and the absence of maybe a mature policy or a mature legislation governing now we have a sports law governance act, but in that absence, do you think this is one of the reason sports law has not seen that growth when you compare it to either constitutional law or commercial law?
Look, I think India being a largely single sport nation is one of the reasons why we have not made that quantum leap in sports law at the moment. That's number one. But there are now enough and more sports in the past 10 years or so, which have a dedicated league system or a franchise system which has been put in place.
Right.
So, for instance, you have Kabaddi, which is probably in terms of broadcast, the second most watched sport
Right.
in
Yeah.
India. Or for that matter, you had football, which attracts large audiences, never really has challenged cricket in the manner where other countries are concerned, but it has a large enough traction and it has a large enough viewership. For that matter, some years ago, you had badminton, you now have the rugby league, etc., starting. So all these sports, because of their league systems, are capturing public imagination
Right.
to a certain extent. And because they are doing that, you have lawyers quickly entering into and supporting this and catching up, because to put a league together, you need lawyers at the back end. They may not be doing
Right. Yeah.
the glamorous stuff in terms of appearing on television, but to make sure that that television rights agreement is signed, you have had a law firm or a team of lawyers who have put in hours and hours of legal documentation. So
Absolutely.
all that work is definitely going on behind the scenes. So when it comes to sports law on the transactions, corporate, advisory, that side, sports law has made rapid progress in India. When it
Okay.
comes to disputes, there is still a fair amount of work to be done before we have a bar or before we have a body of lawyers
Right.
who are doing it on a sustained basis.
Agree, sir. Given that the industry is slowly opening up opportunities for lawyers, uh, how do you think junior lawyers or maybe students who want to make a place in this career field should go about, given your experience in this industry and your work experience? Because when I was a student, when I first uh, came to know about sports law, I was maybe in the first semester of my fourth year, and at that time, COVID had hit and our colleges were closed. So that is how I decided to start lobby. But for anybody else who wants to make a place in this career, what would be your suggestion? Or should they focus on internship? Should they focus on writing? Should they focus on networking? What would be your advice to them?
Look, I think they can do all of these things. I know it sounds a lot and it can seem overwhelming, but I think you can break it down into small steps. So, for instance, writing is one of the best ways to make an impression and to gain an understanding of this field, because sports by its very nature is quick paced.
Right. Yeah.
And what is the flavor of the season right now will not be the flavor of the season going forward. So that is definitely something which they can do. So, for instance, just to give an example, the Anwar Ali case last year was probably the biggest case in Indian sports law which was going on.
Right.
But this year, it's not the biggest case, because the biggest case in Indian football ultimately became the case of the AIFF's own constitution, which was going on in the Supreme Court and now judgments reserved. Or for
Mhm.
that matter, how the AIFF was taken to the Court of Arbitration for Sport in the cases of Interkashi and Churchill Brothers and Namdari,
Right. Yes.
where
Yeah.
there were all these complaints that they have not implemented their rules properly.
Right. Yeah.
So Anwar Ali, which dealt with a fair amount of administrative law, was the main case last year. But this year, it's something completely different. And there, the focus is more on commercial law, on rule interpretation, on other aspects.
Right.
So you need to have a broad-based understanding of law before you venture into this space. So as much as you write and you expose yourself to different branches of law, the better you will equip yourself to make a mark in this area. That's number one. Number two is that given that sports is so quick and so fast paced, I think one of the areas where law students can definitely make a mark is that if they are closely tracking these developments through social media.
Okay.
I'm not saying doom scrolling for that matter at all,
Right.
but way sports news breaks out the quickest is on Twitter. And
Right.
if
Yes.
you're engaged with people who are in this space on Twitter, and if you're able to build a meaningful connection there by putting in a comment which is valid, which offers great insight, which catches their attention, then it's a building block. Of course, it also helps you understand the area much better from experts or from people who have put in a large number of years in
Right.
this. And then you can start building on that as well.
Right.
So you can utilize something which you enjoy, that is spending time on social media, and take it to the next level by building meaningful connections with people who might offer some valuable guidance in this practice area.
That's really interesting because of all the experts that I've talked to in this industry, nobody has suggested this the social media engagement thing. And it's like if you see it from a practical point of view, it's really applicable because from my personal experience, I've talked to more people over social media than over LinkedIn. So I totally agree with what you are saying, sir. Uh, Now, coming to the National Sports Governance Act, which came in recently, what are your aspirations or hopes that this act will result in the transformation of the Indian sports industry? Do you think it will be just another act that stays without any serious impact, or do you think it will actually bring a meaningful transformation in our industry?
Look, I've been asked this question once or twice before, and the way I've modulated my response is to say that I'm cautiously optimistic. I know that sounds extremely heavy,
Yeah,
but at this moment, I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket or getting very excited about it. Because if you see, the act has received presidential assent, but the act has not yet been notified in terms that a lot of provisions which result in this act becoming a workable one, for instance, the sports tribunal, or for that matter, the sports election panel, etc., those are not put into place yet because the subordinate legislation has not come about for it. The supporting legislation has not come out for it. So, in that manner, while we know that there is a broad architecture around the bill and it will become workable very soon, but at this point in time, it is not. So, I don't want to get my hopes up too high. Having said that, I genuinely hope that when the sports tribunal becomes functional and when the sports election panel becomes functional, we have people who possess some significant expertise in
right,
the sports sector that become part of it. Because it would be absolutely ridiculous if you have a sports dedicated tribunal, which is just being given to someone as a post retirement avenue who has no interest in
correct.
sports
Yes,
and then who's learning on the job. Because if you have that, then it's a huge risk that we are running, that
right.
we're changing our system completely and we are then learning on the job, and ultimately sports and sports persons will pay the price. So at
Absolutely.
this moment, I don't have my hopes up too high, but I'd be delighted if I'm proven wrong.
Everybody is hoping for the same, sir. One of the things that the act addresses, or it's a new aspect that is brought, is the athlete representation. From my understanding, this act is trying to strengthen that part, which has been missing for a long period of time, or at least an effective mode of athlete representation is being missing. Do you think a higher level of athlete representation, at least in governance and management of Indian sports, will be good, or do you think it should be left over to the civil servants who know how to manage?
organization or run the country?
Look, I think some amount of athlete development, or sorry, athlete involvement is definitely desirable and definitely something which will be beneficial. Having said that, there is a compelling need to strike a balance between athlete involvement and not uprooting administrators from it.
Okay.
Because an athlete can be extremely proficient at the sport itself, but there are several things which go on behind the scenes, which the athlete may not necessarily have exposure to. So,
Right.
to give you an example, an athlete may not necessarily have the domain expertise in formulating a code of ethics
Right.
which is governing it, or the athlete may not necessarily be equipped to secure the best set of broadcasting deals which ensure that money is put back into sports,
Right.
or for that matter the athlete may not necessarily be best equipped at preparing a set of support professionals who will be advising the federation in the best possible manner, whether that's a extremely competent CA or that is a strong sports expertise lawyer, or
Okay.
for that matter, that is someone who has a fair understanding of sports journalism. So I think involvement of athletes is a great thing. It should definitely be encouraged, but at the same time, I'm not a huge votary of the fact that the athletes on their own are essentially the best set of people to take sports forward. They need to have a large number of people who are equipped in this branch
Right.
to make a meaningful contribution. So if
Okay.
the athlete has that support system around them, then absolutely fantastic. Athlete development can really help in putting us at the next level.
Absolutely, agree. So this is because in our previous episode you had raised this the same question, and I had asked if athlete representation does it just become a showpiece that yes we have athletes, but at the end of the day the athletes either they do not have any actual say or they are for maybe whatever reason they are under a pressure to align with whatever the authorities are saying. But after listening to your input, it makes sense that yes, athletes may understand a certain aspect of the sports industry or how the athlete needs to be managed. But yes, there's a governance part where maybe existing experts need to come in and help the athletes make a better environment. So that's a good point. Is there anything that you think the National Sports Governance Act could have addressed, or is there any other gap in the sports governance or the sports legislation that could have been dealt with but was not or could not be done due to some reason?
Look, I think one area in which the Sports Governance Act could have been stronger and could have had a greater set of safeguards or greater set of checks and balances is that it could have taken a hardline stance on the tenure limits or the age limits which are there.
Right.
At this moment, it seems that the government, while formulating this, has looked around and seen extensively who is at the helm of affairs for a lot of sports federation, and then seen, okay, if we make this act applicable across the spectrum, then so many of these people will be uprooted.
Right.
So they have decided to take an easier approach in letting a lot of these people continue and not making them ineligible.
Right.
So there might be an argument that continuity will help Indian sports, but at the same time, there is also a counter argument to be made that Indian sport at the present point in time has not achieved its true potential because the set of administrators have not necessarily been the best. So
Correct.
by putting in strict age term tenure limits, you had the opportunity to blood in new blood
Right.
and to get a new set of faces in who would have probably been a better choice than status quo, but
Right.
not seen that. So with what we have, we'll have to make do. And
Right.
let's see how it pans out.
Okay. Uh, I saw that you have represented athletes at the caste level. And a couple of days back, I was talking to another senior lawyer who has who represents players at the caste level as well as in Indian courts. And the first thing that he said was uh, every athlete does not have the resources to represent themselves or their issue at the caste level, and that is a major issue because Indian courts, at least most of them, do not have the understanding or do not have the expertise on how to manage sports dispute. Do you agree with this? And are there any other issues that you have faced while representing athletes at the caste level?
Look, athletes, unless they are people with extremely deep set of pockets or who are habitual offenders, will probably end up going to the CAS once in their life.
Right.
Because you wouldn't usually experience an athlete who is repeatedly getting hauled up for doping violations or facing match fixing allegations, etc., etc. So it's rare that athletes are repeat litigants or repeat players before the Court of Arbitration for Sport. They may face other litigations, but at the CAS level, which is usually a culmination of huge layers of appeals,
Right.
it's slightly rare. But having said that, the expense involved in CAS proceedings is a substantial amount of expense because one, it's conducted in Switzerland, and while you have the opportunity to participate in it through VC, but there are a large number of administrative costs which are to be paid. In
Right.
addition to that, there is arbitrator fees which is to be paid.
Right.
And unlike Indian arbitration, where almost all of it is at the very outset divided in a 50-50 between the appellant and the respondent, at the CAS, the respondent can straight out say that, no, I'm not going to pay my share of advance costs. Make sure that the appellant is paying it.
Right.
So if the athlete is the respondent, that works very well because the athlete can defer that payment. But if the
Right.
athlete is the respondent and suddenly you expect him to shell out money, which is in Indian rupees equivalent to 30, 40 lakhs just to keep a case going, is a huge amount of investment. And they
Right.
sometimes don't necessarily opt for it.
Correct. Yeah.
So, yes, that's right, that Indian athletes especially face a huge set of hurdles when it comes to agitating their cases before the CAS. And when it comes to Indian courts equipping themselves to deal with it, look, I think it's going to be a long exercise. We can't expect Indian courts to get up to world-class standards in a short period of time. We also have to be extremely mindful of our own national situation, which is unique to us, because at the end of the day, we are the most populous country in the world.
Right. Yeah.
And just to have this expectation that athlete issues must be resolved at the absolute earliest, and they should be given more amount of court time as opposed to, say, students who are writing an exam, or a corporate which is dealing with a bank guarantee issue, or for that matter somebody who is facing eviction orders from their home. It's a very difficult balancing act.
Right.
So I don't think that at this point in time Indian courts in a short period of time can become too much better. Having said that, once the act comes about, there will be no option for lawyers and for the courts to apply themselves to the act, and through that process gain more expertise in it and become better as we move along the way. So that's how I
Absolutely.
see it.
Uh, Thank you for your insight, sir. Now, coming to another revolution that is slowly coming on its front foot, AI and technology. Do you think with as time progresses, will there be a rampant use of AI when it comes to sports dispute, either on field, off field, or managing athletes using AI? How do you see AI being a good tool and a good source of good governance in the sports industry?
Look, that's an extremely interesting and a tough question for the simple reason that AI is moving so fast that we don't know that what will be the contours in how AI interacts with sports, say a few months down the line, let alone years. But having said that, let me try and give you a simple example of what can be one of the most dangerous things about AI. AI, and we already have a lot of deep fakes which have come about. So in that regard, sports, because of its very nature and sports rivalries, which are very fierce, if deep fakes start getting used and it starts coming out that players of a particular team are inciting the other set of fans, etc., then that can be a huge problematic area. It is not something which is yet happened, but I don't think it's something which is that far off if you have a mischievous mind putting things together. And while the law has safeguards about it, that if you doctor videos, if you create this, then you're liable to be punished. But then again, the law is not keeping up pace with technology as quickly as it should. So that's definitely a problem area. Having said that, there are a huge number of positive areas as well where AI can make an impact. And I think one of the major places where it can make an impact is increasing fan engagement with the clubs, with the athletes, ensuring that a lot of it is more streamlined and a lot of time and effort which was put into manually sorting out data now just becomes a seamless exercise. So in that regard, it is definitely something which has huge potential to go forward as well. So there are both pluses and minuses. Having said that, I think there are more pluses in it, but if I can predict how its trajectory would be going forward, then I don't think I'm the right person to do that.
So you talked about fan engagement and technology. A couple of months back, or I think a couple of years back, a new notion had been thrown out in the market. I don't think it happened in India, maybe in the European football, where the fans could purchase NFTs, and then they had a fraction of the say in how clubs could be governed, how a player could be selected, not selected. Do you think something like that could happen in a market like India? And if yes, do you think our laws or the governance structure is mature enough to handle that?
Look, I think whether it can happen or not is anybody's guess, but whether it would happen or not, I can say with some amount of certainty right now that no, it would not happen.
Okay.
And two, even if it were to happen, at this moment, when it comes to legislations in sports, fans and stakeholders are extremely wary because the legislature has stepped in to end extremely flourishing enterprises. And I'm talking about online gaming.
Right.
So at this point in time, I don't think a lot of people would be very welcoming of the idea that if you suddenly opened up this for larger participants, whether that would translate into ownership, because even if something is assured at the moment, given the legislature's record of shifting the goalposts after parties have made substantial investments, I don't think that inspires too much confidence. So I don't think it is likely to happen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being very candid about that. It was really nice talking to you, sir. Any final words of wisdom or any advice for any law students or junior lawyers wanting to build a career in this field, in the field of sports law?
Look, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for ensuring that I got the chance to share whatever little I know with all your viewers through this platform. So I'm grateful. And when it comes to just any piece of advice on how to be more engaged with this, I think one of the things is a lot of us who get into sport and who get into probably other things related to sport is because we are excited by the fact that there are people who are pushing themselves to test all limits.
Right.
And yet at the same time, they are extremely mindful of the fact that you can only push yourself to test these limits if you're also putting in a lot of effort into self-care. So I would say that please push yourselves, try out new things. These will all help. But at the same time, please remember to be kind to yourselves. Please put in that time to get the desired amount of rest, desired amount of recuperation. Don't compromise on your sleep, because being involved in sports and in anything related to sports is there for the long run. So if you burn yourself out too quickly, then you are not equipped to make a lasting impact. So push yourself, but at the same time, take care of yourself.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being an amazing guest. Before you leave, we would love to have a rapid fire round just to pick your brain on your input on the sports industry. So, are you ready for it?
Yes, go
Uh,
ahead.
Favorite sports to watch?
I would say cricket.
Most challenging case that you worked on?
Anwar Ali, the East Bengal Mohan Bagan case.
Okay. Two books every law student interested in sports law should read on.
Oh, well, that's a tough one. I think if you're looking for the Indian context, then I would definitely be a little selfish and recommend my own. But
Right.
having said that, I think just any basic book on sports law from a European continent, which gets you started. So probably a book by Professor Mark James to get you started, and a book from American sports law context to again offer you a broader idea. What really helped me was reading books by Professor Peter Carfagna. So either books by Professor Peter Carfagna or books by Professor Michael McCann.
Thank you.
So that for the American context, and Professor Michael James for the UK context.
Okay. Worst courtroom cliche that you have ever heard?
That it always gets better at the end. Sometimes it doesn't.
Right. Best piece of legal advice you have ever received? It either may be related to your career or just a basic advice.
When you're arguing in court, you're not necessarily being judged by one person who is sitting in the judge's position, but by multiple other people who are in the courtroom, who are either opposing you or waiting behind you for their matters to be called out. So you're there being judged at that moment for your level of preparation, for your dedication to the brief, for your understanding of the law by each and everyone who's present, even though you cannot see them at that moment in time.
That's really nice and beautiful. One word to describe your career so far?
I would say satisfying.
Okay. Okay. Preferred way to relax after a long day?
Some amount of sports watching for sure,
Okay.
and an early meal, getting into bed, and not worrying about too much what's coming up the next day.
Okay. And the last one, what what's the biggest misconception that you've heard about sports law?
That if you're a sports fan, you will necessarily do well as a sports lawyer, provided you are a lawyer to begin with. I think that doesn't necessarily always work. And some of the best people in the sports law business are people who are not necessarily head over heels with sports because they can look at it with a greater amount of objectivity
Right.
and analyze things better from a slightly more distant viewpoint.
Amazing, sir. Thank you again for being an amazing guest. Any words for our audience before we end the session?
No, I think all that I would say is that keep watching Ishaan's channel. He's doing a great job. And as you watch more and more, you'll probably enjoy more and more.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.